Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Tracy Glab. I'm the Curator of Collections and Exhibitions at the Flint Institute of Arts, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this virtual presentation of the Sheppy Dog Fund Lecture by Dr. Gary Rendsburg. The Sheppy Dog Fund was established in 2012 by Dr. Alan Klein to present speakers addressing the topics of art, religion, and history prior to the 19th century. Thank you, Dr. Klein, for continuing to bring these wonderful lectures to the FIA. I know everyone will enjoy hearing tonight's presentation by Dr. Gary Rendsburg, and we look forward to joining you again on August 25th for the Sheppy Dog Fund Lectures by Dr. Joseph Reif on the port of Caesarea Maritima. That's virtual. And then in person, very exciting, on September 29th for Dr. Taylor Haygood's talk on the Baroque. Please visit flintarts.org/lectures for more information, as well as recorded presentations of previous Sheppy Dog Fund lectures. A quick word about this program before I introduce our speaker. Though we are airing this via Zoom, audience members are muted and your cameras are turned off. If you would like to submit a question, please do so via the Q&A button or chat at the bottom of the Zoom window. We are also broadcasting live via YouTube, and you can enter your questions there as well. The Q&A portion of the program will begin after the lecture. Without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce to you to tonight's speaker. Gary A. Rendsburg serves as the Blanche and Irving Laurie Professor of Jewish History in the Department of Jewish Studies at Rutgers University. His PhD and MA are from NYU. Dr. Rendsburg is also the author of 7 books and about 190 articles. Wow. His most recent book is How the Bible is Written. I now turn over the Greatest Bible Ever Written program over to Dr. Gary Rendsburg. Thank you, Dr. Rendsburg, for being with us tonight.
Thank you, Tracy. Thank you very much. Thank you to everyone at the Flint Institute of Arts. It's a true honor and a pleasure to be here. And especially thank you to Dr. Alan Klein for funding the Sheppy Dog lectures. I've enjoyed some of them that have been posted at the Flint Institute of Arts website. It's really wonderful to have the opportunity to learn from colleagues who present such interesting topics, and in the case of this evening, to be the presenter myself. So thank you, and hello to everyone in Flint and wherever you are in the virtual world across the US and perhaps even abroad. So there's a pretty, what shall I say, grandiose title, The Greatest Bible Ever Written. I'm calling it that because I really think that that is the case. Kennecott manuscript number 1, held by the Bodleian Library in Oxford, written in La Coruña, Spain, 1476. I will discuss a little bit about how it got to the Bodleian Library in Oxford at the end and who Benjamin Kennecott was and his role. But I want to focus first and foremost on the manuscript itself, and you already see here an image of one of its opening pages. So when I say the greatest Bible ever written, obviously there's only one Bible, although even that is not an accurate statement because there's a Jewish Bible, there's a Christian Bible, which includes the New Testament. There are translations into Greek and Latin and English and all sorts of languages. By the greatest Bible ever written, I mean in Hebrew, in the Hebrew original, the Jewish Bible. Obviously, there are superb manuscripts throughout the world of all different kinds of Bibles. I'll just mention 2 of them. The Lindisfarne Gospels, written in northeastern England, now held at the British Library, and the Book of Kells at the Library of Trinity College, Dublin. Absolutely wonderful manuscripts, both of them relatively short because they contain only the 4 Gospels of the New Testament in Latin with illuminations. This is the complete Jewish Bible from Genesis through the end in Hebrew. Now, let me remind you when we talk about 1476. When we pick up a book today, and this is my Hebrew Bible, it is a printed book. Everything today, almost everything, is done through the printing press. Actually, we're now in the next revolution into the digital age. But if you go back before the 15th century, every single book, as it were, composition, Hebrew, Greek, Latin, Arabic, Sanskrit, Persian, you name it, a scribe had to write it out and made a single copy. His, or in some cases her colleague, would write it differently. The words may be the same, although not always, but it will look completely different, as opposed to my copy of, let's say, Lord of the Rings, which is exactly like your copy of the Lord of the Rings, pagination and everything. So manuscripts are a relic of a different time, the Middle Ages, antiquity and the Middle Ages. It so happens that 20 years before this manuscript was written, Johannes Gutenberg invented the printing press in Mainz, Germany, and printing began to spread throughout Europe, but it didn't displace manuscripts overnight. We have printed books, and the Gutenberg Bible is in fact the Bible in Latin from the middle of the 15th century. And eventually Hebrew font was created very quickly, especially in northern Italy, where we do have printed Hebrew books from the 1470s and 1480s. But we're not there yet because manuscripts still are reigning supreme, especially in Spain, where Hebrew printing had not taken hold yet. Okay, so Kennicott Bible, written in La Coruña, Spain, 1476. I'll show you the map later, the far northwestern corner of Spain, now in the Bodleian Library. This is the opening page of the biblical text, Genesis chapter 1. Now, whenever I present, you will see in parentheses or a little note at the bottom, folio such and such. Folio means a page of a medieval manuscript, but we count them as single sheets. So there's a recto indicated by R and a verso indicated by V. When we paginate a book today, like the one I just showed you, we are counting consecutively. So a 400 folio page manuscript would be the equivalent size of an 800 page book today. You understand how the counting works. Okay, now before the biblical text begins, this is 9V, 9 verso. Before the biblical text begins, the scribe and artist, two separate individuals, we'll talk about who they are later, we know their names. The scribe and the artist created individual pages to begin before the biblical text, and here are the opening pages, 1V on the right, 1 verso, 2R on the left. Remember, Hebrew books go from right to left. So when I say 2R hyphen 1V there in the bottom text box, I'm actually trying to align them with the pages you see in front of you, 1V on the right, 2R on the left. So imagine this thing, the book is now open. The codex, to use the technical term, is now open to see it as you see it here. It begins with a grammatical treatise, interestingly, written by a medieval scholar named David Kempchi, who lived in Provence in southern France, and its Hebrew title is Sefer Michlol. Apparently, the idea was you can't possibly understand the Bible correctly until you know biblical Hebrew well enough. So the entree to the biblical text, which begins at 9V, is actually several pages of David Kempchi's grammar, Sefer Michlol, which, by the way, is continued at the end of the book, as I'll show you, to create something like an envelope or bookends to the actual biblical text. Here's some more pages of that. You can see these beautiful illuminations, birds and Hebrew text and animals and so on. And then you come to the biblical text. This is the very beginning. This is Genesis chapter 1. Those are the sizes of the pages. In a few moments, I'll show you the actual volume. And then at the end, I'll actually show you myself with the volume so you get a sense of what it looks like. But 27.5 by 22.5 centimeters or 11 by 9 inches to give you a sense of the size of the page or each folio, not all that different from our typical paper that we use today in our printers and so on, 11 by 8.5. Ample margins, beautiful artwork. Notice the big letter in the upper right. The first letter of the Hebrew Bible is written large. It's the Hebrew letter bet, pronounced as a b sound. It's written large. Again, there is a tradition to actually do that in Jewish manuscript tradition, but also it's imitating, by putting it in a box, a good part of the Christian scribal art, as you know from having looked at, if you can imagine, the way medieval Christian manuscripts looked. I'll constantly refer to Christian manuscripts as we proceed. Here's the book in its box. It's obviously in a binding. By the way, the binding, which I don't have a picture of here to show you, is, although you can see bits of it, is original to the late 15th century, according to the binding experts. And I just wanted to show it to you opened up in the box. You get a sense of its size. And again, I'll show you later on towards the end myself in front of the volume. Okay. Now, what makes it so special? What makes it the greatest Bible ever written? Well, whether you can read Hebrew or not, I hope you can appreciate the superb quality of the letters themselves. Every single letter, whether it's the B sound or the D sound or the M sound or whatever it might be, they are almost exactly the same. It's almost impossible to say this almost looks like it's unlike, when we print, every letter looks the same. He is so superb in his letter writing that every letter is done explicitly the same. The lines are justified, Hebrew written right to left. So of course the right margin is going to be justified, but even the left, as you can see, there's 2 columns to a page here. Even the left margins are perfectly justified the way he laid it out and had the spacing all done correctly so. Now, the first 5 books of the Jewish Bible, known as the Torah or the Pentateuch, is read on an annual cycle every Saturday morning in the synagogue, another section, 54 such sections, which take you through the liturgical year. The Hebrew word for this is Parashah. At each parashah, at each portion, a nice convenient English equivalent, parashah equals English portion, they even sound alike. Each section or portion is introduced in this Bible with a piece of art to tell you that you've reached the end of the previous section and you are now at the new section. This right here is the Hebrew word parashah. This will always be written larger. It's actually an abbreviated form of it. And there's a little numeral right here. The Hebrew letters of the alphabet are actually used for numerals. This tells you that this is the second parashah of the Bible. I showed you the very beginning where Genesis chapter 1 starts. This is Genesis chapter 6, and it's the story of Noah and the flood. I have some Hebrew in the bottom there for people who know the Jewish liturgical system, which parashah this is. And I'll show that it's also on upcoming images. Not to worry if you can't read the Hebrew. This is the beginning of the story of Noah and the flood. And notice what the artist has done. He's done this beautiful piece of art here with double animals, some sort of mammal at the bottom and something like birds at the top, because of course all the animals are going into the ark 2 by 2. So his symbol, his illustration for the Noah and the commencing of the start of the Noah and the flood story is actually tied to the content of the Hebrew text. Generally, however, that's not the case. This is a few chapters later, in the middle of the book of towards the middle of the book of Genesis, story of Abraham. And the marking there on the left image, you see there's a whole new portion or section or parashah break. And I've blown it up for you there on the right, some sort of fantastical creature, right? This is not a real animal. And in any case, it has nothing to do with the actual biblical text, the story of Abraham. You turn a few pages. This is the story in Genesis chapter 23, which is the death of Sarah and Abraham's needing to obtain a burial place for Sarah. And you get some sort of bird creature with a crown, nothing to do with the actual story. Generally, the portion art markers are not tied to the content. The Noah one was, but typically these are not. And just a few more examples, right? Something like a bent javelin. Story of Isaac has nothing to do with the story of Isaac and Esau or anything like that, but there is a piece of art. Absolutely Beautiful artwork, absolutely beautiful lettering. Clearly, the scribe and the artist worked hand in hand. By the way, for those of you who are already curious to know, the main Hebrew text, as you can see, is written in very large letters, but on the top margin, look at the image on the right, at the top margin, the bottom margin, and within the columns as well, there are small Hebrew lettering. These are annotations, which were handed down for hundreds of years as to various stylistic and scribal and even grammatical features of that particular passage. So you have the equivalent of footnotes or marginal notes or something like that decorating the page. One more example from later on, the story of Jacob. And again, nothing to be, some sort of bird, a chicken or something like that here. Nothing to do with the content, just to show you how beautiful the text is. The artist is able to do this. And again, here is that word in Hebrew, abbreviated Parashah or portion, and that's the Hebrew numeral 7 to tell you we've now reached the seventh week in the liturgical year. Now, a few pages later, we're near the end of the book of Genesis now. We're in the story of Joseph. And you now have another parashah or portion marker at the very top of the page, top right of the page. And in this case, the abbreviation for the word parashah, this is the P sound, and this is the R sound, the Hebrew letters Pei and Resh. Here they are, and here they are blown up, are formed actually out of human and animal shapes. That is the brilliance of our artist. Again, it's the word's abbreviation, but there is the Pei and the Resh, okay? The first two letters of Parashah. In these previous ones, he just used the Hebrew lettering, regular Hebrew lettering, okay? But here, for whatever reason, he decided, okay, I'm gonna get fancy this time. I'm gonna use human and animal shapes to create these letters. What's interesting is that there is no indication that this is the 10th portion of the liturgical year as we approach the end of the book of Genesis, 10 weeks after the whole process started. However, note the dog at the top. The dog evokes the shape of the Hebrew letter Yud, which is the 10th letter of the alphabet, which marks the 10th, which is used for the numeral 10 as well. Everybody understand the brilliance here. I can't see all of you, but I'm expecting all the nods as you can appreciate the brilliance of what our artist has done. And from now on, we're going to refer to this little dog as Sheppy in honor of the Sheppy Dog Fun lecture. Thank you, Dr. Alan Klein. A fantastical bird. This just goes on and on. Every single one of these is indicated in these fashions. And another one. Right? Later on, this is in the book of Numbers, right? Nothing to do with the topic, just some sort of fantastical stuff happening here. Okay. At the end of the book of Genesis, sometimes at the end of biblical books, most times the artist, the scribe left room, and the artist creates these beautiful, this is a almost full page, some Hebrew text at the top, almost full page, of the kind of designs that you see here, geometrics and so on. When you move into the book of Exodus, look what happens in these two columns. Well, we haven't seen this before. You've got these two vertical things happening here on folio 43R on the right. Turn the page, 43V on the left. This is Exodus chapter 14. This is the story of the Israelites crossing the Sea of Reeds after they've left Egypt. And you know what the biblical text says there? It says that as the waters were split, and the water was to them like a wall on their left and a wall on their right. And the artist has taken advantage of that and has shown you the walls here to show you how the artist and the scribe clearly had to work hand in hand, literally, right? There is no marginal notes between these columns that were covered up by this artwork. In fact, as you hopefully can see, there's tiny little Hebrew here the scribe rather, had to write them this way instead of the usual way, as the artist and the illuminator were working in tandem, page by page, folio by folio, proceeding through this entire text. This should look a little different to you because instead of block prose writing, you now have poetry laid out for you. This is Exodus chapter 15, which is the story of is the poetic version of the Israelites passing through the Sea of Reeds with the Egyptians in pursuit. Moses, under God's command, brings the waters back together again, and the Egyptians drown while the Israelites pass through in dry land. Look at the geometric shape here on the right, this rectangle. Okay, this was here on the left-hand side, upper right. Here's a close-up of it, again, with this Hebrew notation serving to create the diamonds and the crisscrosses and the geometrics. The last line of the poem is remarkable because it says, the sea ending, which I've indicated there with a break, ending the previous half verse. And then it says, and the children of Israel walked on dry land in the midst of, and then there's more white space, and then again the word the sea. So you have the word the sea and the sea in Hebrew, hayam, the same word, the sea written right and left, with white space on either side, and then the Israelites walking on the dry land in the midst of the sea. In other words, what you get here is a visual wordplay or a visual representation through the words of the Israelites passing through the midst of the sea. Now, in all fairness, by the way, I have to tell you, the Kennicott Bible scribe is not the first one to do this. We actually have this in earlier biblical medieval manuscripts, but I thought I would show it to you here as well, as he employed the same technique. This is a little bit later in the book of Exodus, and what you get here is this animal, and notice a crown, big crown on the animal, or a fortress/crown. This is, according to those who study such things, I should say a word about my own background in just a moment, the artist's image to show you the coat of arms of the Kingdom of Castile, right? La Coruña is part in 1476 of the Kingdom of Castile. There's nothing particular in this portion of the book of Exodus which would suggest royalty or kingliness or a castle or anything like that. But it's a good point to remind us that this is a Jewish community living within the Christian Kingdom of Castile, 1476. I need to anticipate what I will say later. For those of you who know the history, you will know that the Jews were expelled from Spain in 1492 by King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. We'll return to that story. Obviously, the same year that Columbus sailed to what becomes known as the New World. In any case, this is all the Kingdom of Castile. This is all part of that late 15th century Iberian history. So really just wonderful. A little bit about myself, by the way. I am not an art historian. I'm honored to be presenting here at the Flint Institute of Arts. My training is in the world of Hebrew literature, the Bible, archaeology, ancient Israel, medieval Hebrew manuscripts. I pay attention to the words more than the art, but we all learn from one another. And when you study the Kennicott Bible, as I have done so closely, naturally you pay close attention to the artwork as well, as I have learned from art historians who hopefully have learned from myself and my colleagues who work on the textual aspects of these medieval manuscripts. This is later on in the book of Numbers, and what's going on here? Well, nothing. This is the ink that has bled through, not quite bled through, but these are actually pictures on the other side, but I thought I would show them to you here. Folio 74R, turn the page to folio 74V, and now you can see what you saw from the backside, as it were, and here you are. This is the very end of the book of Leviticus, where there is a list of blessings and admonitions. If you, God says, if you observe the commandments, all these blessings will come to you: plentiful rainfall, great harvest, etc. But if you do not observe these commandments, which I give you in this Torah, all sorts of bad things will come upon you, including lack of rain, drought, poor harvests, and I will send wild beasts into the land. Okay, so there's that biblical passage, Leviticus 26, verse 22. And in this case, at the beginning of this parashah, this section of the Torah, towards the end of the book of Leviticus, the artist decided again, like he did with the Noah story at the beginning, okay, this time I'll make it actually relevant to the content. And there you have what I guess is supposed to be a wolf and a bear. Numbers chapter 19 is one of the most obscure laws in the Bible. We won't get into the details. It's known as the law of the red heifer, if you know Hebrew, para aduma, and therefore a cow painted in red to begin this new section of the Torah, Numbers chapter 19, verse 1. Again, in this case, following the content. A few pages later, we have the story of Balaam, a non-Israelite prophet who provides oracles to the king of Moab, one of Israel's neighbors. And the king of Moab brought Balaam the prophet to curse the Israelites, but he didn't. Instead, he blessed the Israelites. And there's an enigmatic line in that passage in the book of Numbers, in that chapter in the book of Numbers, and it says, Uksamim biyado, and his magical stuff, there's no other way to really translate that term, his magical stuff was in his hand. So whatever that meant, let's say 3,000 years ago in the biblical period when this was written, about 1000 BCE, we don't know for sure, but the Jews of the Middle Ages interpreted this to mean an astrolabe. So there he is holding an astrolabe. Jews in the Middle Ages, by the way, were great astronomers, and they charted the skies and they knew how to do astronomy and actually were navigators on ships, including, by the way, Christopher Columbus's navigator, who was a Jew relying on earlier astronomical tables and sky charts and so on that our earlier Jewish scholars had created. So here you have it at the beginning of this section. And the Hebrew number here is the numeral 40, meaning it's the 40th of those 54 that I referred to. We're now getting closer and closer to the end of the Torah. The text in Deuteronomy chapter 6 is the Shema prayer, the central prayer in Jewish tradition, which derives from this biblical text. By tradition, two of the letters are written large, which they are done here, as you can see, and in fact, they are done in gold leaf. This is actual gold, by the way, real gold leaf, and with a little more gold leaf around the entire paragraph. Again, showing you how the scribe and the artist worked together. The very end of the Torah you see here on the right with another geometric, the end of Deuteronomy. The next page is blank, although again it bleeds through. It's not blank, sorry, you have some geometrics. The menorah, which you see, is bleeding through from the next page again. I'm not sure bleeding through is the right word for that. There's nothing really bleeding through, but the coloration you can see on the other side of the parchment sheet. I didn't mention these are all written on very, very high quality parchment made from animal skins. And another piece of art that you see, all of this to indicate the end of the Torah. Okay, let's fast forward a bit. This is the break between the book of Judges and the book of Samuel, not all that fancy, but again, some more artwork. This is the beginning of the book of Kings. The beginning of Kings, the book of Kings starts with the aged King David. He's now advanced in years, and there you see what is supposed to be an elderly king sitting on the throne. How did a Jewish scribe in La Coruña, in a remote corner in northwestern Spain, know what a king would look like? Right? He had never been to the great royal centers. He'd never been to Toledo. He'd never been to these places. He'd never been to Barcelona and so on, most likely. Well, as art historians have informed us, the image of King David is based on the king in medieval Spanish playing cards. They could have been in any household, and this is how our artist knew what a king would look like. Look at the way the robe is parted here, very similar to the way these royal robes are parted. This relatively large club-like thing, like this one here. So you're getting a sense how the artist would know what I said scribe before, I think, how the artist would know what a king might look like. And that, by the way, is the digital image. The entire manuscript is available in digital format. I've asked Tracy to place the link to the Bodleian Library website in the chat for you if you'd like to go explore later. And this is a photo that I took myself of that page opened up. You see the little penciling 185, right? So this is folio 185R. Oh, I didn't indicate it here, but this is folio 185R. Probably didn't have to indicate it since it's written there in pencil. Somebody has gone through, librarian, curator, of course, has gone through and indicated every page number in pencil. And there you have it. Okay. This is the audience participation portion of our program. If we were all together in real time and we could hear one another, or I could hear you, which biblical book is this, right? Well, there's only one ship with one person being swallowed up by a big fish. This is obviously the book of Jonah. Here it is up close, beginning of the book of Jonah. And here it is even closer up, Jonah being swallowed by the great fish. And I love the ship, right? This gives us a sense they're not looking like ancient Mediterranean seafarers so much as they are like medieval Spanish seafarers. So you get a sense almost of what Columbus's ship and sailors would have looked like. Again, this is 1476. And there's that page. When you get to the book of Psalms, every single psalm is introduced with a piece of art, individual psalms. These are Psalms 1 through 9. By the way, the Psalms are not written out in block paragraphing. They're written out more poetically, as you see. So the first Psalm is introduced by the Hebrew letter Aleph, the second one by the Hebrew letter Bet, the third one by the Hebrew letter Gimel, giving us 1, 2, 3, and so on. Here we are, Psalms 85 through 89, just a sampling. But what's interesting is that when you turn the page and get to Psalm 90, all of a sudden, Psalm 90 is introduced, is decorated with this sumptuous artwork here. It is the one psalm in the Bible which is introduced with the words, the prayer of Moses, Tefillah leMoshe. Most of the psalms say something like a psalm of David, not all of them, but that's why David is associated with the psalms. This one is called the prayer of Moses, and all of this decoration highlights this in contrast to these. Hold that thought. We'll come back and explain why the prayer of Moses gets such special highlighting in this Kennicott Bible manuscript. Okay, we come to the end of the Bible, and as I said at the beginning, we have more of David Kimche's grammatical treatise, right? And you can see how the artist and scribe again have worked together to create these sample pages towards the end of our book. Notice we're up to folio 441V, right? We're approaching page 900 if it was paginated according to our modern system. How did the scribe and the artist know where these shapes should come from? So these come out of the world of medieval Spanish architecture. This is one of the great surviving synagogues of medieval Spain in Toledo. Let's go inside. Look at the shapes of the windows on top. These up here. This is the ark. So today it's no longer a synagogue, it's a museum. This is the ark where the scrolls of the Torah would have been kept. And maybe there still are some there behind that curtain. Look at the arabesque art. Look again at those windows on the top of various kinds of shapes. Where did the Jewish architects or the architects whom the Jews hired to make this synagogue in the 14th century get these ideas from? Obviously from churches. This is one of the great medieval churches of Spain, the Iglesia de San Salvador in Teruel in eastern Spain, near Valencia. Right? Look at the artwork of the bell tower. Look at the openings at the top of the bell tower. These things all look alike. Manuscript pages, synagogue architecture, church architecture. It all goes hand in hand. Or in this palace in Sevilla. This is the royal palace in the far south of Spain in Andalus. And it is still a royal palace today. It is still used by the royal family when they visit from Madrid to Sevilla. Look again at these kinds of windows and this kind of arcade look that you see here, and that will explain the artwork that you get in the Kennicott Bible, or this royal palace in Portugal, dated to the middle of the 14th century. Look at the kind of archways over the entranceways in this arcade here in this building. And when you see that, you understand what the artists are doing here, especially those pages, the images on the page on the right, but also the one on the left, right? Look at this. Look at this. Really remarkable. It all goes together, right? This is all the artistic styles of the time period. Now, very near this is still the grammatical treatise of David Kimchi that you're looking at here, but I want to focus in on the top of the page, which you can't see here so well, so let's zoom in on it. What do we have here? On the left are a series of rabbits with spears attacking the castle defended by the dog, right? This is a classic medieval, not Jewish, but if you look in Christian manuscripts, you will see dogs and rabbits. What usually happens? The dog or the hound in real life chases the rabbit and captures the rabbit for the hunt. And in the world of these manuscripts, the rabbits get their revenge on the dog. Okay, so we're not going to call this one Sheppy. We already saw Sheppy before. And you see this imaging here, all underneath of these Hebrew words that you see. The artwork has, of course, nothing to do with the grammatical treatise. Not, by the way, you can also see some fantastical creatures in the bottom left and bottom right. In fact, one of the rabbits is the king wearing the crown. The one on the left is seated on a throne, but then you're supposed to read this something like a cartoon serially, I guess. And now on the right, he's leading the troops, as it were, as they storm the castle. I'm smiling, and I hope you are all as well, the delight of having this in your biblical text, in your Bibles. And here are some of these examples of rabbits seeking their revenge against dogs, a dog on the top, a hound on the bottom. From a Christian manuscript, these are papal decrees of Pope Gregory IX, collected into a medieval manuscript now in the British Library. And it just gives you a sense of what Christian scribes were doing, and artists, and the Jewish, you see the Latin text there, and Jewish scribes simply just followed suit. I should point out that Christians were the first illuminators of manuscripts, and the Jews are clearly aware of what their Christian contemporaries and colleagues are doing. This is a good point to point out the following, good place to point out the following. Remember, they shared the same ink, they shared the same colors, the same paints, the same parchment. They would go to the same markets. They may even have worked in the same ateliers, the same workshops side by side, where they would have had availability. Who has some blue, who has some red, who's got some black ink, anybody have some good parchment. The Jews and Christians would have been well aware of what each other was doing. Christians writing, obviously, work in Latin, Jews writing works in Hebrew. And in the Arabic world, Muslim world, Muslims writing works in Arabic. Again, another page, actually these are facing pages in the Kennicott Bible towards the end. Let's zoom in on this one. The cats are now storming the palace defended by the mice. Okay, so wonderful playfulness. Again, right out of Christian art. Here's the cat using the bow and arrow to attack the mice defending the castle. This manuscript's from England, 14th century, also in the British Library. The Book of Hours is a kind of Catholic prayer book, which select individuals, especially women, held so that they would know when to say the prayers at the different times of the day, hence the title, the Book of Hours. So whether it's the bow and arrow of this cat or the swords of these cats, this is what you do when you want to have some fun with your manuscripts. And as I like to always say, I don't have those in the back of my Bible, right? But that's what makes medieval manuscripts so wonderful. And if you want to know more about cats and dogs in medieval manuscripts, here are the books, okay, by my colleague Kathleen Walker-Mikeley of London, published by the British Library And here they are for you, but here are the book jackets in front of you. Everybody is a specialist on someone, and here we have the world's expert on the representation of cats and dogs in medieval manuscripts. Notice the cat there on the left is holding a rat. It's either mice or rats typically. So wonderful stuff to be studied in these wonderful books. Okay, and there again, cats storming the castle defended by the mice. Going back to the beginning of our manuscript, notice folio 6V and 7R, which are accordingly facing one another. I didn't want to show you this at the beginning, because I wanted to show you a little bit about the animals before I came to this. But you have a bear jester playing the pipe on the right and a monkey jester playing the pipe on the left. Our bear jester looks like he came right out of the Berenstain Bears. Everybody agree? Again, just having fun. In the manuscript, well, Christians do, of course, the same thing. Here's a cat playing the drum and a donkey playing a horn of some sort, right? This is a book of Psalms. It was actually owned by Queen Mary of England, the predecessor, the half-sister of Queen Elizabeth I. And there you have it. Okay. We come to the colophone. A colophone is a text at the end of the book, the end of the codex, which gives us information about the scribe. And here the scribe gives us all the information we would want to know. His name, Moshe, or Moses, the son of Jacob ibn Zabara. I wrote all these books, and he gives us a precise date in the Jewish calendar, which we can translate to 1476 CE. And he tells us that it took place in La Coruña. If you can read Hebrew, here it is, the word La Coruña, the words La Coruña. And he then tells us for whom it was written. It was written for Isaac, the dear firstborn son of Don Shlomo de Braga. And the word Don, the Spanish word for sir or lord, is written out in Hebrew letters, Don, who came from the city of Braga, which is today actually in Portugal. So we learn all of this information from the colophon. And that explains why the prayer of Moses, Psalm 90, is highlighted, because the scribe's name was Moses or Moshe. So he must have told his artist friend, when we get to Psalm 90, we're going to do something special. There's that colophon. And here is La Coruña in the far northwest corner of Spain, in the area known as Galicia, where, by the way, the definite article is a, not la. So the Google map actually says a Coruña. In medieval times, it would have been La Coruña. Not that far from Santiago de Compostela, the pilgrimage site of many Catholics. And here's Braga in northern Portugal today. So you get a sense of where this was produced. If you go to La Coruña, I've never been there, there is still on the map a place called the Synagogue Street. Now, Jews were expelled in 1492, but they never changed the name of the street. So there haven't been Jews here in more than 500 years, and yet there it is, Rua Synagoga. And here it is, thank you, Google Maps Street View, for showing us what the actual street looks like. Okay? Stepping back in time. Although this Bible is in the Bodleian Library, it actually, 2 years ago, visited La Coruña for the first time since 1492. The Bodleian Library agreed to have it on display at a museum in La Coruña. I think that's really, really beautiful. As you can see, it says here, priceless volume returns to Galicia. And here is my colleague, Elvira Martin Contreras, great scholar of Hebrew Bible manuscripts in Madrid, who took the opportunity to go visit the Kennicott Bible. She, like myself and others, have seen it in the Bodleian, but she wanted to see it in the city of its birth. And so she went from Madrid to La Coruña to see it. That's the colophon of the scribe. By the way, we know of other manuscripts of this scribe, right? The same person wrote 2 other manuscripts, one of which is not digitized, but one of which is. One's in the British Library, one is at the NLI, the National Library of Israel. Just to show you this. Now, who's our artist? there is a second colophone with the name of the artist. This is a full page at the very back of the book. And it says in Hebrew, I'll read it, Ani Yosef ben Chaim ze hasefer tziyarti vehishlamti. I am Joseph, the son of Chaim. I wrote, or rather I should put the object first, this book I wrote, this book I illustrated and I completed. This book I illustrated and I completed. And all of his letters, all of the Hebrew letters are formed what we call zoomorphic figures. Some of them are anthropomorphic, but most of them are zoomorphic. Let's zoom in and look at two lines, right? You see rabbits and snails and cats and whatever you have here, including, yes, a naked woman in the next to last letter on the upper line here, okay? And as I always say to my students, you don't have one of those in the back of your Bible, do you? Right? This is the wonder of the greatest Bible ever written. By the way, on the right, you can see where he wrote out the letters first and used that as a guide to try to show how he's going to do it. And then he wrote them out there in big letters on the left. And those remain in sort of almost, light sketch letters, which served him as his guide for when he did the big letters on the full page. In the interest of time, just to show you that we had a naked woman before, as we looked at. Okay. Now, how did the Kennicott Bible come to be? What do I mean by that? All of a sudden, in 1476, this masterpiece just doesn't get created, right? The Empire State Building doesn't get built in the 1930s without some predecessors. Other skyscrapers, beautiful buildings, but not that tall, which are in Manhattan and, other large big cities, New York, Chicago, etc. You would have had to have earlier buildings before you get to the Majesty of the Empire State Building or whatever it is of any kind of work in our human endeavors. In this case, we know the answer. There's another city in Spain called Cervera near Barcelona. I'll show you the map. This was written in 1300. It's now in the National Library of Portugal in Lisbon. Every manuscript, by the way, has 3 stories. Where and when it was written, and if we have a colophone, we learn that information, and by whom and for whom. Where has it been for hundreds of years? And who is the custodian of it today? In which library or museum is it located? So the Cervera Bible written in 1300, that opening page of Genesis chapter 1 looks very much like the one of the Kennicott Bible. Here's the location of Cervera in northeastern Spain in Catalonia. Here's our 2 Bibles, opening pages, one side by side. You can see that they're very similar. Each parashah, each portion, again, is indicated by some special artwork, just like we have in the Kennicott Bible. This is available, by the way, fully digitized, either at the Portugal website or at the WDL, World Digital Library, which is a project of the Library of Congress, by the way. More of the artwork of the Cervera Bible. Okay, this is what he did for Jonah. Sort of a precursor to what the Kennicott Bible artist did. There's a full page menorah here, by the way, absolutely stunning in the Cervera Bible. And 176 years later, in 1476, for whatever reason, the artist of the Kennicott Bible decided not to use anything like this. He had a menorah, which I showed you, but it doesn't take up the full page and is not as beautiful as the one in front of us. Now, how do we know about the Cervera Bible? Because of the colophone. We learn the name of the scribe, Samuel ben Abraham, Samuel the son of Abraham. And he tells us that he wrote it in Cervera, the lower text box or the lower right red highlighting there for you. He gives us a date. Not only does he give us a date of when he completed it, which we also had for the Kennicott Bible, he also tells us when he began it, which is crucial because that tells us how long it took. We don't know how long it took to do the Kennicott Bible because he only gave us the date when he finished it. In this case, we also have the date of when our scribe started this manuscript. And what's really fun is that he tells us, Lehitrape mishvirat shoki, while I was recovering from my broken leg. He did all of this while, not the art was done by somebody else, while he was sitting at home or sitting in his workshop recovering from a broken leg. He couldn't go out. And so we spent the months writing this manuscript. And there's the dates again, which allows us to figure out how long it took. 294 days between the 30th of July and the next 19th of May. You don't work on the Sabbaths. You don't work on the festivals. 241 working days. It's 451 folios. So about 2 folios per day is how one of these manuscripts was written. And if we can say that for the Cervera Bible, presumably that would be true of the Kennicott Bible as well. Here's the colophon of the Illuminator, which for reasons that no one knows, he never colored it. But we learn his name, Joseph or Yosef, the Frenchman. He must have migrated from France to Spain, and he was known simply as Yosef the Frenchman. But you can see, again, how the artist of the Kennicott Bible, written almost 2 centuries later, used the Cervera Bible as his model. In fact, the red cow is there in the earlier one as it is in our Bible. There's the website. Now, there's quite a distance from Cervera to La Coruña. I'm suggesting, in fact, I am stating that the scribe and illuminator of the Kennicott Bible used the Cervera Bible as a model. But how was that possible? The clues are in their Cervera Bible. There are ownership notes written in at the back, the blank pages at the back of the book. Do you write your names in your books? Or maybe have an ex libris thing in your book, right? That tells you who owns the book. Some owner of this book wrote these 2 ownership notes plus a third one. The first one tells us that it was owned by a particular Jewish man named David Mordechai, living in La Coruña in the year 1375. So even though it was written in Cervera in 1300, it had moved across northern Spain and was now in La Coruña in 1375, proving that a century later, our Kennicott Bible could have been created there, was created there. And by the way, some librarian translated the Hebrew into Latin, which you see here as well. And there it says Coruña, by the way. A second ownership note tells us that it's still in the hands of the same family in the year 1439, getting us closer to the creation of the Kennicott Bible. Again, a Latin translation of the Hebrew text. The third ownership note tells us that it was in Constantinople. It's written there in the Hebrew, but everybody can see it here in the Latin. Modern-day Istanbul, in the year 1517. What happened in between? 1492, as we've mentioned, the Jews were expelled from Spain. Where did they go? They went wherever they could, especially to the Ottoman Empire at the eastern end of the Mediterranean. And you see I've put the box around Istanbul/Constantinople. Although many Jews simply left Spain and stayed closer, and that's my box there on the left, and they went to North Africa, away into Muslim rule, away from Spanish control. Some went up the Atlantic to places like Amsterdam and eventually London as well. This is the website of the Kennicott Bible. Fully digitized. Thank you, specialists at the Bodleian Library in Oxford. How did it get there? Benjamin Kennecott was the librarian of a special building in Oxford called the Radcliffe Camera. In 1771, he was a Hebraist. He was not just a librarian, he was a great scholar of Hebrew. In 1771, he purchased the Kennicott Bible on behalf of the library which he oversaw, the Radcliffe Camera. This is the iconic photo of Central Oxford. For those of you who've been to Oxford, St. Mary's University Church, and I guess Tracy won't mind if I tell you that she has been there as well because she's worked on some artists who are associated with Oxford. This is the Bodleian Library quad. This is the Radcliffe camera right here. Once upon a time, its own independent library. Today, it holds the history faculty library. This, by the way, is the Sheldonian Theater, designed by Christopher Wren. And this is the New Weston Library, where the manuscript actually now sits. A lot of old books in the Bodleian itself. This is the Weston Library across Broad Street. And I'll show you in just a moment my inspection of the manuscript in that building. So what happened? The manuscript no doubt left Spain in 1492 with a Jewish family. And those Jews must have gone to North Africa and no further, not to Constantinople or someplace further away. Why? In the 1770s, Patrick Chalmers, a Scottish merchant in Gibraltar, bought the Bible in Gibraltar. Those Jews who left Spain to North Africa probably came back to Gibraltar when it became under British rule at some time in the 1600s or early 1700s. And Patrick Chalmers, this merchant, entrusted it to William Maule, a Scottish lord, the first Earl of Panmure, and this is the ancestral home of the Panmure Earls in Scotland. And there's a picture of the Earl. And he sold it to Kennecott for £52 and 10 shillings, about £9,000 today, for the new collection for the newly built Radcliffe camera, of which Kennecott was the main librarian. That, by the way, is a bargain. There is no price on the Kennicott Bible today. It is impossible to price it. But I can tell you that a manuscript like that would go for several million pounds easily. This one was purchased for the equivalent of what is today £9,000 by Benjamin Kennecott. It bears his name, and it gets high ranking as Kennicott Bible #1, and the other Bibles which he collected, all of them now at the Bodleian, have subsequent numbers. Here I am now 3 years ago with my colleague Cesar Merchan Haman, the Hebraica librarian of the Bodleian University. We're in that Weston Library new building, which I showed you, looking at the Kennicott Bible in its box, as you can see. What a treat to be able to actually hold the book, smell its pages. These are the pleasures of a scholar of medieval Hebrew manuscripts. I showed you this picture before. If you would like to buy your own Kennicott Bible, you can do so. Facsimile Editions, a company in London, has produced a facsimile edition, absolutely perfect, call it a copy, right? An exact copy of the original, and you can have it for just under £8,000. What a bargain when you realize that the original was purchased for what today would be approximately £9,000. Really remarkable story of the Kennicott Bible. Thank you for your attention this evening. Happy to take all manner of questions. Hopefully I have some answers for whatever may be on your mind concerning what I like to call the greatest Bible ever written, Kennicott #1, Bodleian Library, produced in La Coruña, Spain, 1476. Thank you.
Wow, thank you. I'm blown away. This was such an interesting talk, and I want to go back to Oxford and see it myself. It's so cool. Very, very interesting. So yes, we have time for questions, and thank you again for such a fascinating talk. So we have some already that came through, so I'm going to start with those. So one of the first questions that came through was from Michael, and he asks, or says, I have always been intrigued that I can recognize Islamic, Greek, Roman, or Asian art/architecture. I am puzzled why I cannot put into words what Jewish iconography/architecture/art is. Can you provide an answer or explanation of what to look for or know that how to recognize Jewish art other than Hebrew? alphabet.
Right. Thank you, Michael. Okay, so this is where I can easily say I'm not an art historian, and therefore I'm not the person to ask. But of course, over the course of years of studying such things, I have a bit of an answer for you, which is to say the following. Certainly when it comes to architecture, about which I know a little more, and it's almost clearly true of art as well. Jewish art almost always looks like the art of the country in which Jews live. So the synagogue that I showed you has the decoration of mosques of southern Spain, and even the churches of Spain imitated the architecture of the mosques of southern Spain. I didn't mention this, but I think it's important to remember that the Muslims ruled most of Spain for hundreds of years. They arrived in 711 and eventually ruled 3/4 of the Iberian Peninsula until 1492, when they too were evicted from their last holdout in Granada in the far south. So you imitate the art and the architecture around you. The technical term for the art that I showed you is mudajar art. I didn't use that term, which is art done by Christians and Jews in imitation of Muslim styles, even after the Reconquista, even after Muslim rule in Iberia retreated just to the far south around Granada. So if you were to go, and I'm being serious here, if you go to Kaifeng, China, the easternmost Jewish community, which existed down to the 19th century, the synagogue in Kaifeng begins to look like Chinese pagoda buildings, right? If you go to suburban Philadelphia, there is a synagogue designed by Frank Lloyd Wright, the only synagogue that he designed in suburban Philadelphia. So it looks very American because it's Frank Lloyd Wright. So I don't have a ready answer for you other than to say that the art and architecture, the iconography frequently mimics what is going on in the larger society. Remember, Jews were typically, except in the land of Israel, they were nested in a larger host community. So hopefully that gives some of an answer to you.
Thank you. A question came in from YouTube from M. Matthews saying, thank you, Professor Rendsburg, for sharing your expertise. Is it known if the gilding is original or added later or refreshed?
Which building?
A gilding, like the
gilt, the gilding,
the gold.
Yeah, no, it's all original. This manuscript has survived so in much greater, with so much of its original intact, much more so than most medieval manuscripts. I mean, I've held others and they're just absolutely stunning. I mentioned the Lindisfarne Gospels, which is under glass at the British Library, and ditto for the Book of Kells, which is under glass at the Trinity College Library, Dublin, which, by the way, are 700-800 years older than the Bible I showed you, and they are in perfect condition. The point is, if you use high quality ink and high quality parchment and high quality dyes and high quality gold, it will survive intact, unless something drastic, disastrous happens to it. And we have literally tens of thousands of these medieval manuscripts. They're not all in perfect condition. This one is. So yes, as far as I know, nothing has ever been touched from the original, not even the binding.
This question comes in from Ava. When did the practice of including art in Bible manuscripts begin? And was there any resistance to the inclusion of art among biblical text? And a related question to that is about the representation of humans in the Korah or in the Torah. I mean, right. I'm sorry, I'm confusing two things, because they said that Islamic art is prohibited in the Quran, and so wondering what the restrictions are for that.
Well, first I just have to say proud teacher, because Ava is my student at Rutgers University. So thank you, Ava. It's great to see you here this evening. And your question is a good one. When did the practice of illuminating biblical manuscripts begin? So let me just mention the following, which is also connected to the second question. A scroll of the Torah used for liturgical purposes in the synagogue down to the present day has absolutely nothing on it other than the Hebrew text. The marginal notations are not there. There is no colophone. We don't know when the scribe would have written it or so on, unless you keep a record of it separately. Those are ancient scribal practices, several thousand years old, that have never changed through the medieval into the modern period into the 21st century. But if it's not being used for reading from the table in the synagogue for liturgical purposes, your book or your codex or your manuscript, you can do whatever you like with it. And it can be plain, or it can have all the illuminations. Again, the Jews saw their Christian neighbors were doing this. And the Jews started doing it for Bible manuscripts, for prayer books, for the Passover Haggadah, the special text that's used at the Passover meal at the Seder. And so we get these starting in the 13th century, to answer your question directly, Ava. Our earliest manuscripts of the entire Bible, 10th, 11th, extant manuscripts, 10th, 11th, and so on, centuries, 12th centuries, do not have any artwork. Well, there's one in the 11th century that has what we call carpet pages, separate pages near the beginning and the end, but no artwork on the pages that actually have the biblical text on it. But by the 13th century, we begin to see these. And again, no doubt the Jews saw their Christian neighbors doing it. The Christians had been doing it since things like the Lindisfarne Gospels, I think, are the 8th century. So, pretty, and the Book of Kells as well, pretty early on in those Latin texts. As to the humans and the animals as well, correct. The Islamic law. So let's set the stage. The Bible says, it's built into the Ten Commandments, that you cannot make any images of God, or you cannot make any images of anything on the earth or the heavens above or the waters below as a representation of God. So over the years, the three religious traditions have interpreted that in different ways. The Christians interpreted that quite liberally. You can even make representations of Jesus, of course. God the Father, rarely. The Holy Spirit, typically by a dove. Muslims, not that they have the Bible, they have the Quran, but they're heirs to the same tradition, are very strict in their interpretation of that, which is to say there can be no portrayals of anything human or animal, anything living. So all of Muslim art is geometric shapes, as you saw in some of the buildings, which were Jewish and Christian, but based on Muslim models, and calligraphy. You can all picture the Muslim alphabet, which is very calligraphic. That's how Muslims do art, with geometric shapes and calligraphy. No animals, no humans. Jews are in the middle. You can certainly not portray God, and there are no portrayals of God anywhere in any Jewish context. But there is no prohibition against animals or humans or fantastical creatures like I showed you, unreal things. It is a misconception that Jews actually forbade art. They did not, as hopefully the Kennicott Bible, more than any other text that I could show you, demonstrates.
Great, thank you. We have a couple other questions coming in through YouTube. Jean asked, what was there any organized training for scribes or illustrators within the Hebrew community at that time?
So the answer is almost undoubtedly yes. I can't put my finger on it. Well, let me say the following. For the writing of scrolls that are used in the synagogue, that we know, that practice, which is handed down from generation to generation, often from father to son, nowadays in a more egalitarian world, women as well. You have to be professionally trained to do that because there are legal requirements as to the way the text has to be written. The manuscripts don't have any legal requirements. You can do whatever you'd like, as certainly I showed you. And presumably, just like who becomes an artist today, right? Everybody has a talent. Somebody might be able to read Hebrew and sing Hebrew and chant the text. Somebody may be able to master another profession, such as parchment maker. And clearly the scribe and obviously the artist just had the natural ability and would have been trained by some other master. By the way, I actually want to go back and just mention something about, going back to the question earlier, Some of our earliest Hebrew manuscripts, which are illuminated, with the illuminator, scribe was obviously Jewish who wrote the Hebrew text. The illuminator was sometimes a Christian because they knew how to do that kind of stuff. The Jews came to it later, right? So some of our earliest ones we can demonstrate were done by Christian artists, and then eventually the Jews took over that, as, for example, the two manuscripts which I showed you today. I also want to mention, since I just said egalitarian, we know of one very famous female scribe in the Middle Ages, a woman named Paula, living in Italy in the 13th century. We have about 6 or 7 of her manuscripts, and it's just wonderful to know that there was a female scribe. We know of numerous Christian ones as well, but we have at least one example of a Jewish woman who did this, and she was taught by her father.
Very interesting. The two people asked the question regarding the photo of you and the scholar from Oxford with the Bible, and that neither of you were wearing gloves. So they want to know why no gloves.
Why no gloves? My favorite question and my favorite answer. Okay. But we do not wear gloves typically when we see these things, when we hold these things, for the following reason. Occasionally I've been asked to put on gloves looking at something, but almost always not. Here's the answer. Parchment is produced from animal skins, typically sheep skins, sometimes calf skin. The best parchment, by the way, is made from deer skin, but it's very difficult, of course, to get a deer and get deer skin. When the animal is killed, you send it to a tanner, and the tanner produces the parchment. But the tanners work together. This tanner is going to make leather for you. He's going to make shoes and belts and other leather objects. And the colleague is going to take it one step further and turn it into parchment by constantly smoothing it, both sides, right? Do you have an old leather belt sitting in the closet, or an old leather jacket that's sitting in your closet for the last 5-10 years that you've never taken out? And when you finally take it out, what's happened to it? It's dry and it's brittle and it's almost not wearable anymore. These parchment manuscripts are like those leather jackets and belts that we don't wear. They require the moisture of our fingers to touch them and open the pages and allow them to breathe so they don't get brittle and they don't crack. They want you, wherever you go in the world, to any of these libraries, they want you to not to wear gloves. They want the oils of our skin, you have to be clean, of course, but they want the oils of our skin to actually touch those pages. It's good for the manuscript. Counterintuitive, right, everyone? But that's, and that gives you the tactile, of course.
Yes, and more even works on paper. Sometimes no gloves is preferred because with clean hands, because the risk of tearing the paper is less without the paper. So, and then a question came up related to illuminated Bibles. And Robin asked, what are the best places to see illuminated Bibles in the United States? The Morgan Library in New York City? ?
Yes. Before I got the addendum to the question, I was going to say the Morgan Library in New York City. J.P. Morgan was a remarkable collector, and his collection is probably the best place in the U.S. But and he collected everything. But the cloisters of the Metropolitan Museum, both the main building in New York and the cloisters, the Library of Congress has certain things on exhibition. The Huntington Library in Pasadena and the Getty Center in Los Angeles. These are the great centers. I don't know if the Newberry Library in Chicago, not too far from Flint. Am I missing anything, Tracy? You would know some of these. These are the great libraries.
No,
yeah.
I think you
And sometimes they're on display. They'll do special displays, and sometimes you would need to actually go see them. Ask for special permission. It goes without saying that the great collections were already collected in Europe before we got started. So, the Louvre and the Bodleian and the Cambridge University Library and the British Library, these go back centuries where these great manuscript collections were created, and all sorts of other archaeological artifacts and so on, and art. So we're fortunate that we have what we have in the US. And there is a worldwide effort now to digitize as much as possible. And, I follow the Hebrew material most, but keep my eye on the Latin and other material as well.
Unmute. Are there any other questions? I think I've read all of the ones coming through on YouTube and Zoom, but we still have time for a little more if there's any other burning questions. I actually have a question while we're waiting to see if anyone tunes or mentions one. So you mentioned that the illustrations are not tied to the biblical content, but are any, well, let me rephrase this. Are any related to a Midrash or something that is written outside of the biblical content, but might be relevant?
Right, great question. So the Midrash is all of this sort of post-biblical, folkloristic interpretation of the biblical text, and it gives us other stories. And the answer is yes, Tracy. There's probably one or two examples in our manuscript, which I didn't show you, of the art is actually elicited by or evoked by some midrashic tradition more so than the biblical text. The picture of Balaam holding the astrolabe in his hand is a sort of medieval midrash kind of thing, but there are other examples of that. Only one or two in our manuscript, but certainly in other manuscripts you'll find that. Yes.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Mark asked, what about the Jewish Theological Seminary in Manhattan?
Oh, how could I forget? Yes, the best collection of Hebrew manuscripts in the United States is the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York, whose library houses several thousand medieval Hebrew manuscripts. They just built a brand new library, closed the old one, put everything in storage, and on the same site built a new one. Books, everything had to be put in storage. It has reopened, I believe, but because of COVID times, I'm not sure, and anybody has access to it yet, other than the few faculty members and perhaps some students who are there at the Jewish Theological Seminary. But yes, it has a great collection. And by the way, the Clow Library of Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati also does for Hebrew manuscripts. And the Library of Congress has a good collection of Hebrew manuscripts. Yeah. The question is, are they on public display? So that's the biggest question.
Well, I think we're very lucky in this day and age to have so much digitized. I know that's very cool, and I can't wait to look at more. So we're out of questions, and I do want to plug the next time you're going to be in Flint, but this time not virtually, hopefully in person. On March 16th, 2022, Dr. Rendsburg is going to travel to Flint to give a talk on the Cairo Geniza, which is very interesting, the repository of Jewish manuscripts, historical manuscripts that cannot be destroyed. Am I saying that right? For sacred reasons. So I'm really looking forward to that and to meeting you in person. And so we hope to see everyone there. And thank you again, Dr. Klein, for sponsoring the Sheppy Dog Fund lecture series. And thank you, everyone, for attending this talk. And thank you for Dr. Rendsburg for such an illuminating, sorry, I can help myself, talk on the greatest Bible ever written. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tracy. Thank you, Dr. Klein. Thank you, everyone.